Hi, everybody. Hopefully I'm clearly audible. Just let me know in the chat if I'm not. Thank you. I'd like to invite everybody to the semifinal round and congratulate everybody who's made it so far. Before we begin the debate, I'd like to invite my panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, this is Nidhi, may pronounce as she, her, and good luck for the debate.
Hi, my name is Supei. All the best for the debate. She, her, they, them pronouns. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't believe we need to move through speaker introductions. So if you have a preferred way of receiving POS, or if there's a pronoun you wish people to use to refer to you for the purposes of this debate, noting also that it is being recorded, you're welcome to provide that before your speech commences. I'll be placing time signals in the chat, but I'm not perfect, and not noting a POS timestamp does not mean that there's flexibility in time restrictions, so we will stop noting at 7:15. With that, I'd like to yield the floor to Prime Minister to confirm the motion before the House that will be debated and presented to the floor. You're here.
Hello, I'll be the Prime Minister for today's debate. My name's RK. He, him, they pronouns. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anton. I'll be the deputy, he, him pronouns as well. POS in chat.
Hello, I'll be the government whip. I'm Naomi. No pronoun preference. POIs in chat. Thank you.
Yep, and Prime Minister, the floor is yours to confirm the motion and begin the debate. The Prime Minister very much for their and yield the floor now to the Leader Opposition, reminder that he pronouns and they receive POIs by voice. You're here.
Hello. Can you hear me? My internet is a bit so. So I'm assuming everyone's okay? Cool. POIs. In that case, I'll just turn off my video. Is this okay? Is this better? Okay, poggers. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. If Greta Thunberg screamed, "How dare you!" in a forest and nobody was around to hear her, did she make a sound? I'd like to ask side proposition as to why they're circling around the stakeholder that absolutely do not want to listen to us. We are very much proud to propose. So what's our counter narrative? That instead of pushing this onto big corporations and big polluters and ignoring individual responsibility, we as opposition rather focus on people on the ground rather than big corporations because of our burdens, which are proving that A, that these corporations cannot be held accountability effectively, B, that ours is more feasible, and C, it's more effective in providing organic change and tangible benefits, and D, why corporations are also going to cut down their environmentally harmful activities on our side, as well as provide social change, which will be brought up by my second speaker. What's our counter narrative? First, we're going to give them more info, tell them what to do, how to do it, further reinforce when environmental activists are local and can decide what people in the local are capable of doing, and encouraging them to do via protests, brochures, and where we'll give them like wooden toothbrushes, for example, and ask them to go greener alternatives, show them that their actions have a cost, and tell them that the way they are living causes detriment to many individuals around the world and as well as themselves. And by boycotting using food products that harms the environment, there are plenty of Pringles and chips. Therefore, I say that there isn't necessarily by boycotting other foods or products that harms the environment, instead of going for Pringles and chips, maybe for another bag of other snacks that are more environmentally friendly. So understand who are the ones pushing this narrative, like a few points of characterization. There are political activists who are very poor, that the only political narrative they have is by getting donations by pulling up people's heartstrings. For example, the hashtag Save Ralph video. Also because there are no corporations funding them, due to them insisting on policies that damage these corporations via green policies that are actually antagonized by these corporations, making it harder for them to implement these policies. So I've integrated some of my rebuttals into my characterization, since it's clashed with it. So while PM may say that corporations use this narrative to shift the blame to consumers while getting away scot-free, that's easily rebuttable because understand that this narrative has been around for a long time and is very prominent in school curriculums and social medias and etc. And when people are aware of it, they see the necessity and the urgency to take care of the environment by reducing carbon footprints. Now that people are actively doing this in status quo, this awareness becomes the reason why Greta Thunberg and other environmental activists can call out mega corporations for their carbon emissions. More people support these anti-corporation environmental movements on our side because with this narrative, A, people are aware of their own necessity and urgency to take care of the environment by reducing carbon footprint, as well as what corporations do, and B, point in time when the narrative is very prevalent and many people go green themselves to a great extent, it's harder for corporations to shift the blame onto the people. Then it's easier to hold corporations accountable because the people are obviously not at fault. So who's the one responsible for climate change, but also the one that's the hardest to change? With this characterization, it rebuts Prime Minister for opting to target against big corporations. There are big corporations that have a lot of power in the political scene, like for example, ExxonMobil lobbying Trump to not force stronger greener legislation on corporations. Corporations are going to counter-influence via sponsoring anti-environmentalist movements, funding biased research, repeal of green legislations because they have the capability to push back against you, and their significant influence in policy making and all sorts of other larger scale movements. They're also very hard to catch these companies in the act of corporations dumping more than they are allowed to and causing more environmental harm, meaning they are already dumping and it's very hard to catch them, i.e. Toyota oil crisis, where from 2005 to 2015, a whole decade of dumping into the ocean legally went unreported. So who's also responsible, but also easier to change? The people on the ground, obviously, and it's actually tied to them more, meaning based on my characterization in the previous one, they're the first people to face the pollutants, giving them largest incentive to change. These people have no information, understand, i.e. they do not know what they're doing or how they can contribute to saving the environment, or like how to recycle the different types of plastic straws, etc., or consequences of their actions, meaning this means that things are brought back and tied to them as they see what they are doing and know what they should or should not do. And please understand that people pollute most of the time because it's more convenient for them, not because they are pursuing a quick buck, unlike corporations. And this means that they are more capable and willing to give up pollution as it doesn't exactly bring them substantial and physical benefit, which takes down Prime Minister's arguments of people being demotivated from being environmental friendly because the opposite is true. Next is the idea of individual responsibility. This takes down what Prime Minister says about people not being able to be people being demotivated and people not being able to go environmentally friendly. Opposition said, what does individual responsibility means? It means to limit the amount of damage you can do to the environment at the best of your capabilities. Basically, not asking people to literally quit their jobs at oil refineries, but instead opt for greener options when they can. When they can. This looks like, instead of taking one car to work all the time, this looks like carpooling or taking trains over. That's the idea of responsibility. So what are my arguments for today's debate? Firstly, to prove that this is a better use of political capital on the ground and the tangible benefits that come from it. And secondly, organic change. Corporations pollute because it's cheap, and individuals pollute because it's convenient. People are much more convenient to change because there are long-term benefits to those alternatives and because the bar is so much lower and easier to manage. So political capital. This looks like A, Greta Thunberg and her influence on society, and B, Extinction Rebellion, that people are aware about environmental issues and have pressure on policies and legislations, a result that comes with encouraging individuals to violently rebel against extinction, pun intended. This leads to, firstly, access to information. People are more or less just not aware of these problems, while corporations are aware but do not want to change it because, money. The capacity of reaction is larger on our side and is going to counter-influence via sponsoring anti-environmentalist movements, funding biased research, etc. Secondly, corporations are the major source of polluters. If you can persuade the majority of people to go green, people can be more environmentally friendly and aware, and such things are going mainstream. Secondly, organic change. More people are going to go more green because it's the greener option, i.e. Burger King's Impossible Burger that's really popular now. And for example, Dasani creating more plastic bottles that are more compostable. Constantly pushing individuals to not litter, brushing teeth for 3 minutes, forming protests in neighborhoods, parks, mamak stores, going door to door, passing out brochures of wooden toothbrushes is what we're pushing for individual responsibility. And it's feasible because understand on their paradigm, lobbying exists. companies will regress because there's no incentive for these companies to do so, because they're capitalistic incels who the only green they care about is money. And it's more feasible when you get people on the ground to change their ways due to them being affected by most of the environmental changes. So can you seriously hold this company accountable proposition? Because you need to catch them already messing up and dumping more than what's legally allowed to curb amount of innovation that was already brought. And with that, I've never been prouder to oppose.
I thank the leader opposition yield the floor now to the Deputy Prime Minister to resume the Deputy's speech. Reminder that he him pronouns and POIs in the chat.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yeah.
All right, thanks. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The abstractions in LO's language hides the assertions at the very core of this opposition team's case. They say that lifestyle changes is going to lead to a better environment. They do not, however, answer the question of what. What will you change exactly? How will these individuals going to change? How likely are these individuals going to change in the very first place? But crucially, this is a retrospective debate. So when LO says that this narrative has been around for so long, and as a result, we see the Amazon forest burning, we see a large scale of it, like climate action failing. This undercuts their claim on this on this narrative being effective in the very first place. But crucially, the missing link between lifestyle change and better environment is that you have to prove how you're going to get people to change their lives, and whether or not this change that these people are going to create will be sufficient in order to create a better environment. We suggested, coming from RK, that because of the industrial revolution and because corporations have the greatest amount of carbon footprint, likely they are the greatest contributors to climate change. And crucially, these are the people that we ought pander to, because they are the key for us to change the environment that we live in. They say that if we are able to persuade people, we're going to have critical mass. The problem with LO was that they just simply asserted that people are going to be persuaded without explaining why. I would say that it is unlikely for people to be persuaded on their side, because as RK explains, people are going to feel like there is prejudice against them. People are going to feel like the environmentalists are elites who are antagonistic against them and against their lives. This is harmful because it means that they cannot unlock their benefits whatsoever, because they cannot unlock critical mass, and therefore cannot unlock the amount of people sufficient in order for them to have a great amount of lifestyle change. Therefore, they're unable to claim that they have better environment. I say that there are 3 factors that dictate the outcomes of this narrative, and retrospectively, I will explain in this speech and explore all 3 of them and prove why this narrative has harmed people and the environment on an incredible scale. The first factor in terms of this narrative is the buy-in that we get. So we have to ask the question, who are the people that buy into this narrative the most? I say it is likely the rich who have the greatest amount of disposable capital, who can feel guilty about these things because they recognize the harm that their corporate empires have created. I say it is unlikely to be the poor. Why? It is because these individuals are frugal, they save, and do not have time to feel guilty for climate change and for the bad environmental practices that happen as a result of them having to fight for their lives, as a result of them having to wait paycheck to paycheck in order to know if they're going to have food on the table. This is crucial because it means that the type of people that you affected on opposition side are the political and commercial elites. Therefore, this is a small subset of people that you're able to affect, meaning that you're unable to get any of the change that they say was important. Secondly, I say that corporations therefore pander to people with the most amount of disposable income, meaning that they start creating totally new industries at a high price as a result. They do not, however, abandon certain actions or do not stop exploiting resources, meaning that likely some form of plastic exploitation still exists. Terrible mining practices are still likely to exist. Therefore, it likely means that without the mass regulation of these kinds of things, through government intervention, through things such as mass demonstrations and boycotting of people, because you rely solely on the individual feeling guilty, on the individual feeling responsible, you fail in being able to change the environment. Thirdly, then, I say that the implication here is that the quality of life overall for the greater public of individual decreases because it is harder for them to attain certain items that are essential to life. It is harder for them to to buy certain things because now it becomes more expensive because companies are pouring in money into research and development for the green tech. Side opposition satisfies the need of the rich people to feel satisfied and at peace at the cost of the environment and lives of other more vulnerable individuals, such as the poor people in society. Second factor, I think it's accessibility. The narrative has made it increasingly expensive. Why? I think it's because of limited buy-in. More niche production, meaning they have to create newer factories. Niche demographics of people that they have to pander to, aka the rich. It ultimately results to higher prices, but crucially, there are no incentives for these things to be cheap. Therefore, it is something that even if people wanted to buy, even if the poor people or middle class wanted to buy into, there are no incentives for them whatsoever. This is because there are no incentives for companies to make these things accessible or cheap. The elites ostracize and oppress poor. It creates social and class divides, which crucially means that there is harder political buy-in. You diminish the capabilities of community-based organizations, non-government organization lobbyists to gain traction for other sustainable practices as a result, meaning that even if you want to branch out to other narratives in the future, you lock out and you diminish your capability to do these kinds of things. Then, third factor is the environment. I would say that companies then create a market race in order to pander to the richest people, richest people in society, therefore creating mass exploitation of the environment. Therefore, meaning that a lot of individuals are left out as a result, and the environment is something, and the environment and you create irreparable harms as a result. We cannot rely on the market to change corporations because it's something that harms the environment, crucially, but also harms the most vulnerable individuals and the greatest mass of individuals that you ought pander to. Sure, POI.
Understand that we're not forcing people to buy Tesla cars. We're just forcing them to change parts of the public lifestyle. That's literally it, right?
Yeah. So what changes do you expect them to make? More oftentimes, the types of changes that these individuals are expected to make are things such as supporting sustainable farming, which, by the way, is radically expensive. It's supporting metal straws, which, by the way, literally breaks down mountains. It asks these individuals to buy incredibly expensive goods at no particularly good benefit. We gave you a number of reasons to believe why our counterfactual is better. One is because mass demonstrations allow us to have proper political lobbying and incentivize the government to have protectionist policies. That is to say that you're going to create probably price ceilings, for instance, in order for these types of goods in the future to be more accessible to people. Secondly, it's going to regulate the operations of corporations to make sure that the process of making these types of things aren't simply just greenwashed, but rather things that are actually sustainable in practice. Three, it means that workers' perception within these corporations are going to be broken down because they no longer have to be allies to the corporation, because we are able to work within the structure because we're non-antagonistic and we don't create a market risk for these corporations. As a result, you are less likely to see environmentalists as elites, and the greater public buy in as a result. For all these reasons, propose.
I think the Deputy Prime Minister kneeled the floor near to the Deputy Leader, reminded that he and pronounce POI's thick with. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I audible?
You're quite clear.
Alright, thanks. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think it's quite convenient for side government to brush off Ryan's characterization of how corporations actually look like and how the green movement actually looks like. But just to sum up the entire government case, it's literally just a sad solution and problem mismatch, right? Corporations have huge financial and political capital and pollute our environment. Their solution is we protest, we publicly demonstrate against them. Benefits are carbon tax, holding corporations accountable, and so on. Yeah, one problem, however, their characterization screws over the entire case. If they have financial and political leverage, this means that they have the power to push back against these sort of protests to begin with. These sorts of public pressure won't work, especially if money is involved and the public propaganda campaign is still existent under status quo, right? The only argument that I got from DPM, there was just a lot of jargon, is that poor people are unlikely to buy in. Understand that Ryan legit characterized to the best of their capabilities. You're not forcing people to buy Tesla cars. You're saying that they should reduce littering, they should do this and that, and that the cumulative effect of doing all of this to change parts of their lifestyle is able to have a positive impact on the environment, and I'll explain that on as to why that's necessarily the case, right? My entire argument is literally just this. the direct consumer influence of individuals and corporations. There's a destructive relationship between individuals and corporations under the status quo, in which corporations are incentivized to constantly manufacture accessible convenience to consumers to be bought by consumers and to rake in the profit. Pollution is merely a necessary byproduct by such individual. No corporation will want to willingly pollute the environment if there is no profit incentive to do so, but this relationship is abusive in the sense that individuals are so accustomed to the environmentally destructive lifestyle that to opt for a greener relationship would just seems unfeasible and inconvenient to begin with. The accessibility of convenient goods and the lack of accessibility when it comes to greener alternatives are the core problem, because individuals in poor communities see corporation and their pollution as a necessary evil for them to get basic and cheaper good, where anyone above the working class just do not care enough. The impact of eating a singular piece of steak or a 30-minute drive to work just seems inconsequential, but the problem lies not with the consequences of eating steak, but rather the corporate incentive that comes with it, right? If more people are eating steak and consuming steak, it sets a narrative that this sort of industry is very profitable and corporations are instead going to ramp up funding and maintenance of slaughterhouses, because the maintenance comes in with the production of beef, and the production of beef equals to money, right? No matter how unsustainable it is. This means that there is a direct consumer influence on how corporations behave. If corporations know that unsustainable practice can help them earn a quick buck because people are reliant on the status quo, they'll do that to the very best of their ability, right? It's very problematic. The corporation will somehow miraculously change when there's protests and such, because they'll simply just push back to an even greater extent because of the financial capital that's literally at their disposal to lobby for deregulation, funding oil and mining advocates, public propaganda campaign, and so forth that can easily discredit the green movement, right? This was the ExxonMobil saying that they're contributing to the environment even though they did literally nothing, right? These are the sort of public propaganda campaign that happens because of public pressure. They may seem to be like change, but it's tokenistic at best. But sure, we ought to bring that change from the bottom up, because consumers are still the main leverage holder for corporations to change. When corporations are given the signal that greener alternatives are another source for money, corporations will also have an incentive to manufacture and sell greener alternatives as well. Because as the slogan goes, if it's marketable, ExxonMobil, KFC will probably sell it, right? No matter how small those changes are. But it's not just changes in consumer behaviors, right? But also personal behavior as well. Switching off the light, not wasting water, reducing your amount of litter and so forth are free to do. It's just that we don't want to do it, right? So when we force and encourage people such changes in behavior, gradually it makes them more aware of the individual and societal role with regards to the environment. So once people care about the environment and are responsible enough to care about it, they could also form social and political movement. This is why we swallow the entire argument, right? They push corporations and in large masses as well. It's just more of a matter of which do we do first. It is really problematic to organize protests and any form of civil disobedience if people just are not going to care because they're not aware of such things. No sort of urbanization or intense public pressure can force corporations to cave into environmentalist concession, and the benefits that their side would say will never actually materialize because it is just a fringe movement with little to no participation and political capital. But when you get people aware about things like carbon footprint, that the destructive behaviors of their lifestyle and so on, you better mobilize protests targeted towards corporations now, because there's an increased sense of urgency to mitigate the harms of corporation towards poor community, toward the lifestyles of this individual. But sure, before that, yeah,
I think you're confused with what your bench is. You argue for blaming corporations to make them change their practices. This can only be effective if the dominant narrative is one that blames them and not individual. Your side focuses on small actions, not large actions, guys.
Understand that it is literally, the thing is, at least on our side, we get marginal change. On your side of the house, corporations can still push back. You never characterize corporations because you know it's unstrategic to do so. The moment that you say they're large and financial political leverage is the moment that your entire case falls apart as well. Now I'm moving on. Besides, personal responsibilities are not like forcing you to buy a Tesla car or go to all for some sort of expensive alternative. It looks like reducing littering, using public transport, minimize water wastage, or any sort of like personally feasible option that doesn't require that much financial capital. The cumulative effect of small and gradual individual change, coupled with the reduction of manufacturer supply from corporations, means you as the consumer has the ability to directly influence corporations and their action by changing the profit incentive to do so. On a much more principled basis, we say we win. We said that the corporation is not just the responsibility of governments or corporations, but rather of individuals. Individuals are responsible in the sense that they are the ones driving up demands and are the ones incentivizing corporations to manufacture and produce environmentally harmful conveniences. This demand still lies on the base of the grassroots, and therefore pollution is indirectly caused by consumer due to where those supplies lead to in the end. Our individual behavior are what drives such demands saw. Therefore, we should change our behavior and instead offer greener alternatives so that corporations are more incentivized to do the same. What side government do when you blame corporations is you're diverting the blame away from the source and demands of such pollution. Sure, ExxonMobil may change their environmental policy, does not mean Shell, Petronas, or any other mining corporations out there are incentivized to do the same, because people are reliant on oil, right? The moment that you can make people reduce their reliance on it, sends a narrative that is not as profitable as it was in the past. What's the point of blaming corporations when they're just earning profit through what consumers want, right? It would be better that we encourage individuals to change the way they consume certain product and to reduce it. You make this change less marketable, and when it's less marketable, companies are unlikely to manufacture and sell it. Under our side of the house, we brought to you the principal argumentation. We told you and we mechanized our arguments already. Under their side of the house, the entire solution is we protest, but they never fail to characterize how is that able to bring in that sort of change. But by the time the week comes out here, it's already quite late to begin with. So yeah, we win. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their remarks and yield the floor now to the government whip to conclude the government substantive. Reminder that that's no preference, the speaker position.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, I'll just set up my timer real quick.
Who would you like to receive PI, please?
POIs in chat. No pronoun preference. Thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's deal with opposition's attempt to respond to Anton when they say that poor people don't really have to buy Tesla cars. Poor people might not have to buy Tesla cars, but at the very least, most low-income lifestyles are still not environmentally friendly. And there will be a lot of pressure on side opposition to tell them that what they're doing is inherently trashing the environment and they have to take tangible steps to be better for the environment. This looks like giving up buying shampoo sachets because these sachets are extremely cheap and can be afforded by most individuals who don't have a lot of money. But the problem is, if you pressure them to give up these types of lifestyles, they have to spend significantly more money for their families. They have to give up something they could have spent on food and spend it on buying more environmentally friendly products. This looks like giving up the use of disposable plastic utensils, and they have to buy things that are ceramic or metal, which I would argue to you are far more expensive for these types of individuals. Even Elo's example of buying a more eco-friendly like chip brand is already terrible for a lot of these individuals who can't afford to buy a brand that is far more expensive than what they usually do because they do not have the capital to have the capacity to care for these changes. This is all true because materials other than plastic are extremely expensive. You have things like corporations that are profit-oriented and use the cheapest practices possible if they want to make products accessible for people to buy from. Therefore, I think this harm still stands on opposition. Given this, I want to clarify something that's symmetric on both sides of the house. I think many eco-friendly practices that opposition keeps talking about, like carpooling, can happen on our side as well, because a lot of people, as we would say, don't have the privilege to be rich. A lot of them already have incentives to care for the environment because of monetary reasons. I want to save and I want to save money on my electricity bill, so I will turn off the lights when I'm not using it. I don't want to spend money on using a taxi cab, so I'll just carpool with my friend if we're going to the same exact place anyway. So I think that a lot of these things that opposition wants to argue can also happen on our side of the house. But where do we draw the line? This is where I introduce my 3 issues. Firstly, on where you hold corporations accountable. Second, where you gain more support for the model. Third, which environmentally friendly model is actually better for the earth. So firstly then, on where you hold corporations accountable. This is where I respond to a bulk of the material you hear coming from second opposition speaker. Because I want to make something very, very clear with the motion. This is a retrospective debate. This is a regrets motion. The only reason why corporations are as powerful as we explain it, the only reason why they're so powerful in opposition is because they've historically used the narrative on individual responsibility to skirt accountability and accumulate political and monetary capital, lobbying power, and influence to sway policies. They can also manipulate consumers and trash the environment. As a result of this accumulated power all throughout the years, the moment they decided to emphasize individual responsibility so that the attention and emphasis is taken away from their actions and into the individual's fault into trashing for the environment. This means 2 things then. Firstly, on proposition, because we regret this whole instance and because it's a retrospective debate where you have to go back into history and take away this thing that we regret that happens on opposition, means that because we replace this with our counterfactual, we no longer have to deal with powerful corporations and the harms that they bring up to you. Therefore, the responses you hear from leader of opposition do not fly. The second thing that this proves is that opposition then cannot co-opt our benefit because you have corporations with cemented structural power who have historically manipulated the market using individual responsibility responsibility in that narrative. Because they have historically told consumers that it's their fault that the environment is bad, they use it to advertise things that tell them, hey, if you buy this like shampoo brand, this is actually better for the environment. You're a better human being if you buy this. Opposition has to realize that the motion explicitly says that large-scale actions is the government counterfactual. And because you have this combined with the fact that they can't really defend going against these large-scale actions that target these corporations, their case falls flat. Even in their best case, let's be charitable here, where people believe that corporations are extremely evil. I would argue to you that there are two terrible outcomes that come out of this like best case. The first is that corporations are already too powerful. They can easily silence the backlash. They can easily pay PR companies to make sure that a lot of the things they do are hidden behind shut doors and that a lot of their practices do not reach the public eye. But secondly, I think corporations, because the pressure comes from the general public and because it's still the general public whose metric is their individual responsibility, it's very easy for corporations to greenwash products if they want to silence people's complaints. As long as they tell you, here we are now eco-friendly, produce eco-friendly products that can be used to fulfill your individual responsibility, that is all the public needs for them to stop their protests. So the delta of change that happened on side opposition is not that much because it's still within the powers of the corporation. But second issue, and where you gain more support for the model, I think this is an important issue because you have to have support for the model if you want the benefits to fly. So let's deal with the many things we say happen in opposition. We give to you many structural reasons as to why people hesitate or feel bad about the narrative, thereby making the opposition model unsustainable and prone to fracture. Let's bring back the things you hear coming from RK and Anton. The first is that you guilt trip and blame the individual for their actions. So we tell them that this is your actions that hurt the environment. It's your fault that that turtle is choking on a straw. It's your fault that polar bears no longer have somewhere to live in. So you pressure these individuals to modify their lifestyle out of guilt, and they can also grow internal resentment as a result of this. Because it's environmentalists constantly telling them that everything is their fault through brochures and the counterfactual you hear coming from LO. There's also likely to make people get turned off because this sort of rhetoric makes them feel attacked and make them feel like it's completely their fault and it's not something they want to opt into. But secondly, it's easy to give up when you feel burdened and overwhelmed with this responsibility to continue not eating meat, to stop buying things that make you happy because apparently environmentalists tell you they're bad for the environment. This is worse for people with less capital to buy expensive eco-friendly products, which make lifestyle changes difficult for the vast majority of people in the long run. Because I would tell you that realistically, like not much people are extremely privileged and can afford the best and most eco-friendly and organic materials in the world. I will take the POI now.
Congratulations, you shot yourself in the foot. If you say the corporations have this much power to manipulate and have propaganda campaign, how are you sure the protests are able to reach them then?
No, I already cleared this up in my first issue. This is a retrospective debate. On our side of the house, because there's no individual responsibility narrative, because corporations no longer have an excuse on our side of the house, they now cannot accumulate power on our side. Because on our side, we have the counterfactual, which prevents them from accumulating the exact same harms we have mentioned happen on your side. We no longer have to deal with these harms that come up with the characterizations of powerful corporations. Next time, please listen. Third thing that we say happens in opposition, which allows them to lose support. The price is likely to make eco-friendly products expensive. Corporations can easily market these products as the best and easiest way to be responsible. Therefore, only those with the buying power, aka the rich, can opt into opposition's model to the fullest extent. Let me quickly bring back the government counterfactual then on how we gain support compared to these reasons that was unresponded to by the previous speakers properly. So in government, we talk about why people opt into our model better coming from RK, like massive protests where you feel like you're part of a unified community hyped up by environmentalists. There's pressure for internal structural change in corporations. There's media sensationalization. It's likely to jump on the growing and mass protests that pressure corporations early on before allowing these corporations to gain power later on. This leads into the wide-scale changes that Anton mentioned. So quickly, in third issue, I'll deal with the best case of government on where which environmental model is better off. Because in government, even if the metric here is the individual responsibility that people feel. So let's pretend that every single person in the world is like using environmentally friendly products. The problem here is that there's still the behind-the-scenes supply chains. There's still corporations who use mine really unethically to make metal straws. There's still plastic production and energy use if you want to create these environmentally products. Therefore, I think that the metric of individual responsibility is something that's ultimately detrimental if you want to care for the environment, if you want to hold corporations accountable. I'm very happy to propose.
I think the proposition split for speech that concluded at 7 minutes and 30 seconds, the last 15 seconds which were not noted. As I yield the floor now to the opposition with the debate. From
Oh, hi, hello, am I audible? Hello,
yeah, you're quite
hello, am
clear.
I audible? Okay, then I'll be starting in 3, 2, One, I think the problem with this debate, right, is that government seems to argue that opposition does not live in the status quo, but is in fact arguing a different retrospective version of the status quo. When in fact, what Op does is defend the status quo, what Gov does is defend the retrospective world in which the narrative never existed. Firstly, I have to address what the narrative actually looks like, right? We told you that often people are not guilt-tripped into being 100% eco-friendly. Not all of their actions have to be completely conforming to the idea of being taking care of the environment. It's not charitable for Gov to assume that the narrative does this, especially when the whole point of the narrative existing is to want to cater to the majority of people in the first place. B, people are rational. Your example of plastic, people not being able to afford metal or glass utensils, means that people can also reuse plastic utensils after washing, or reuse plastic bags the next time they get groceries, right? I don't see why this is an argument that you can take when many alternatives has already been used in status quo by people who cannot afford eco-friendly things in order to mitigate or lessen the harm that it causes to the environment in the first place. Third, because people are not that dumb to waste all the money they have. Four, it's not that overblown, right? This rhetoric has an extremely long history that spans decades, where people don't really have much visceral reaction to it when they hear it. Often, when this rhetoric is echoed in media sentiments, it's something that people already actively do in real life. It looks like people cleaning up their local area, their local rivers of trash to make it look better. Now the narrative just tells you that it's good for the environment, and then you see that there's an extra benefit to it. People already, to an extent, actively turn off their electrical things and their water when they're not using them actively, so they save money, right? If this narrative tells you there's more advantage to it, then of course it's much easier for them to buy into it when the narrative actively reinforces things that they already do in their daily life. Okay, rebuttal to DPM. What do we actually defend? We tell you the reason why Greta Thunberg and other environmental activists in the status quo can call out mega corporations for their carbon emissions and get that international platform and international attention who are interested in their efforts and support them actively is because that this narrative tells the individual that A, the individual has a responsibility to take care of the environment through their own actions. B, now that the individual or many individuals around the world already do it on the micro level because of the narrative, looks like people planting their own vegetables or people using public transport instead of saving for a car, their next responsibility for the individual is to examine what else is the source of pollution in society. And because of that individual responsibility to stop it, they will also try and call out corporations, right? So when the whip talks about how, okay, next, the whip talks about how corporations can shut down protests with their capital and using the excuse of this narrative to blame people. I don't think that corporations need this excuse to be able to hide their own actions. You already told us they have a lot of capital. This is symmetric. They can all just hide their heinous actions on your side as bad as outside. But B, right, we say it's worse on your side. Because this narrative not existing, not being prevalent, doesn't mean corporations can use the same excuse that you say they do on our side. The fact that the narrative doesn't exist doesn't mean that the corporation cannot use it to defend themselves, especially as people already don't have the imperative to take care of the environment into their own hands. Now it's much easier for a corporation to blame people for things that they actually don't do compared to on our side when people actually take care of the environment actively and corporations don't have that much ground to call people out on it. Rebuttal on PM. They say that people think the narrative is unsustainable. They say that people get demotivated because they don't see any results from the action. We tell you these results are not macro. It doesn't mean the whole world will suddenly become clean and global warming will suddenly stop and temperature return to normal when people decide to throw their trash in the trash can. They are micro impacts. This looks like when you cut down on your electricity and water use, you save money because your bills go down. It looks like when your community clean up to clean local rivers and beaches of trash, you have a cleaner place and a more happier environment to live in, right? The rewards are very clear and very impactful because it directly improves the quality of life of people on the ground who do these things. B, they say it's a drastic change of lifestyle. Already addressed why it's not likely to be. And even if it's a drastic change of lifestyle, the personal benefits that come from it are heavily outweigh the fact that it might change or it might make them uncomfortable. It looks like an overweight person choosing to diet in order to cut down their weight and to have a better body image or body positivity about themselves, right? These are sacrifices people actively make, drastic changes, and people evidently want to make because they want to see a better world in which they themselves live in. Third, they say that it will become infamous and there's always dissent. We tell you that even if not everyone believes it, many people already do in status quo to the point in time where the narrative never existed, means that people never want to take any steps to want to live in a more eco-friendly way in the comparative, because this narrative is exactly what tells them that they need to take care of the environment and they have to take matters into their own hands. So yeah, next. PM said that corporations have greater environmental impact than people. We say it's proportional. If every house or every person out of the billions of people in the world all dump their trash into the river, isn't it quite similar in scales of impact of all the mega corporations polluting the air anyway, right? But here's the thing: who is the easier one to convince? Is it easier to convince a corporation, a profit-driven corporation, who is performative in their environmental actions and actively ignore oil spills, just like how government characterize? Or the normal layperson who are likely to want to sympathize with things like their favorite animals going extinct due to global warming and seeing that they can save a lot of money by doing all these environmental friendly things? Who's the easier one to convince here? And when you upscale this to the global population, you see that this narrative has actually created a lot of positive environmental change, right? I'll take one now.
You have yet to prove why you're going to be able to persuade these people, so as a result, you cannot unlock your benefits.
I literally just talked about that, right? Like incentive, like, oh, the panda is dying. I think pandas are very cute. I don't want them to die. So I'll do these things to help the environment. Or helping the environment actually saves me money. Things like that, right? It's been in the first speech the whole time. So on the retrospective debate thing, if Gov wants to take this as a retrospective debate, it means that Gov has to defend a world where this narrative never existed. We tell you the whole reason why modern people feel the moral imperative to want to go green and care about the degradation of the environment, and as well as support environmental movements, is because this narrative exists that tell people that they have the self-imperative to want to condemn themselves first, condemn the society next, and condemn the mega corporations for their heinous environmental actions. So I think, right, if you say, if Gov is going to debate in in an imaginary fairy world where somehow blaming corporations doesn't mean that you are taking your own action in order to hold them accountable, we say we swallow all their benefits and never prove to us why any of their arguments are mutually exclusive because of these reasons proposed.
I think the opposition would kneel before and it's the opposition reply. Here.
I'm not audible.
You are, yeah.
Actually, I'm not comfortable speaking. Give me a moment. Right. Okay. This better. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Lack of engagement with our arguments, no process analysis whatsoever, improper characterization, constant so many of our arguments, and brushing the entirety of our argument by saying, hey, it's retrospective, bro. That doesn't make sense. We can have many narratives that it doesn't have to be one that shuns individuals and favor corporations. On your side of the house, the narrative that you choose is one that is contradictory. You want protest, you want carbon taxes, but the problem is, if the entirety of your government whip is saying that there is public propaganda campaign and disinformation campaign by corporation, it is unlikely that protests are going to do anything. More or less, corporations are going to be tokenistic. They're going to say, hey, we're doing this, and in fact, they're not, right? This is happening on your side of the house. You're not going to quell, they're going to quell down the protest and nothing happens in the end. On the outside, however, we get those sort of marginal changes and the incentive to do so. For what I saw in the debate, side government fails to prove the following in this debate. Both sides want to enact corporate change. I don't see how a fringe political movement can achieve those sorts of changes. What we need to do is educate and to encourage personal responsibilities, because it makes people more consciously aware of their current condition and from there mobilize political and social movement. We swallow the entire argument. Second, knowing that corporations are this powerful and can change such a narrative with such an influence over individuals, then things like calling them out or any sort of civil disobedience are unlikely to work, simply because corporations can just push a greater counter narrative through the mass media. There's a greater outreach towards the more general audience, right? Third, unity against a hostile entity can only work if more individuals are aware of such thing to begin with. I don't see how under side government will such a mobilization be achieved, simply because under the status quo, people just do not care enough. What we are trying to do is make them care about such situation, and from there mobilize and protest, and from there hold corporations accountable. That's achievable under our side of the house. We saw all the benefits. Fourth, why under their side of the house will such changes even begin with, right? Let's just like ignore the fact that corporations are this powerful and are unlikely to change, and say for the sake of argument that changes could be achieved. I do not see as to why those changes would be sustainable to begin with, simply because people on the ground are still reliant on such product. This means that if you force corporations to change without making people adapt to those changes, corporations are just going to revert back, right? And 6, knowing that consumers are unlikely to change under their side of the house, I have yet to see analysis as to why consumers would then change under their side of the house when corporations adopt environmentally friendly products, right? It's an assertion that's very absurd. And we have already acknowledged that it's not just green alternatives, but also like on the personal level. It looks like things like preventing water wastage or reducing your littering. Those are the things that we are able to have as well. And also keep in mind that we are also influencing the ultra rich, right? This means that the sure, of course, the poor, they have lesser environmental capability, but then again, they do contribute to the cumulative effect of environmental degradation alongside the ultra rich. This is where we say that on both spectrum, the rich and the poor, yes, people are going to die because of environmental degradation. I don't see how your side can prevent people from dying because there are no analysis as to the likelihood of that sort of chance happening. I want the government to explain properly as to how a fringe political movement can somehow counter the influence of corporations. People are incentivized to purchase environmentally friendly products because on the outside of the house, when you make individuals aware of the individual environmental impact, you increase the sense of urgency surrounding individuals, and that urgency translates into community frustration and anger towards corporations. And when people are angrier, when people are more aware about the situation, corporations are now more likely to succumb to this sort of pressure because this sort of pressure poses a great threat to the profit. So government kept bringing up environmental so government kept up bringing this idea that people are unlikely to change, when Edmund literally told you how people are incentivized to change. Under your side of the house, protests can't work. That's the entirety of why there's a problem and solution mismatch, and the entirety of your weight speech shot yourself in the foot because of those reasonings above. And because of like the entire thing that was said, the lack of rebuttal, the brushing off and whitewashing of our argument by saying that it's retrospective, it doesn't win this debate at all. That's why we win. Thank you.
I think the opposition reply and yield the floor to the proposition reply to conclude the debate as a whole. Here.
Hello, before I start, I do not consent to recording.
An excellent friend. Results will be. You don't need to record the deliberation. You can turn it